Hello everyone, welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Today in this session we are going to have a discussion on the newspaper of 10th June 2024. So let's begin with the list of articles first. So we have these 4 articles where we are going to do a detailed discussion today. So these articles, first we have on page number 8 something that is related to RBI's Monetary Policy Committee, the new discussions that we have seen in yesterday's newspaper. Then after that, on page number 9, we have something related to Nota and how the things are changing, and in some areas the things have not changed. Now the third article that we have is it time for proportional representation? So we'll discuss what do we mean by proportional representation and how exactly is that system different from the system that we are using today. So we'll discuss that. And then migrants left stranded as Tunisia tries to keep them from reaching Europe. So what is this migrant crisis and what are the issues here? We'll try to understand that. So these are the 4 articles that we are going to do a detailed analysis on. And then after that, there is one article you can say is a prelims based article based on something called as hydrogen line. So what is hydrogen line and what are the applications of hydrogen line? So these are the things that we are going to discuss in today's lecture. So let's begin with our first article, which is on page number 8 on your editorial page today. And this is something which is related to RBI's monetary policy. Now what we have seen is that the Reserve Bank of India, the Monetary Policy Committee of Reserve Bank of India has decided for the 8th consecutive time in 8th consecutive meeting to keep the benchmark repo rate as unchanged, and it has been kept at 6.5%. Now understand why exactly have they done that. Now when you look at this decision and why this decision might have been taken, the decision is something that might have been driven by some of the concerns which are related to and that are driven by the high food inflation, that is something that is undermining the efforts to achieve a durable price stability. So we have seen that the food inflation has been on a rise, especially in the last couple of months we have seen it. And what we have seen is that the RBI governor, he had highlighted that the risk is something that is posed by the persistent food price increase, and this is something which is leading to overall disinflation path, or something that has posed a risk for disinflation path that we want to take. Now when it comes to food inflation, which is very often measured by the consumer food price index, it has something which has rose to a very you can say almost at 8 point, it has risen to 8.7% in April, and in March it was 8.52%. all right, so it has risen to 8.7% in April, and in the month of March it was at 8.52%. Now basically what we see is that there are further accelerations which are also possible in the month of May due to the rising prices which we significantly have seen in 3 of the most important vegetables, that is tomatoes, in onions and potatoes. Now the Monetary Policy Committee, it also has acknowledged the challenges that have been posed by the adverse climate events as well. For example, the kind of heat wave that we have seen in the last month or so, all those kind of effects also have to be accounted for, and that's why this is something that also causes some kind of supply shock, which makes the entire food price trajectories very unpredictable all of a sudden. So that's why we see that all these things have been observed, and the last month's heat wave, that's why in this particular context has been very, very crucial, which has something that has led to the rise in the fruit and vegetable prices. So that's why we see that there are all these cases as well. So that's why when it comes to the climate events, we have seen that low water shortage, low water in reservoirs, and high summer temperatures, that they have also added to the food price volatility in the last couple of months. So That's why when it comes to the water shortage in the reservoirs, or the high summer temperature that we have seen, or even the rise in the metal prices, also have been attributed to. At the same time, what we have seen is that some of the tensions that we have seen in the West Asia, that has also led to an uncertain outlook for the crude oil prices as well. And that's why we have seen that there have been output cuts that have been made by the OPEC plus countries. So this is something that is further complicating the entire inflation scenario in India as well. So that's why what we have seen is that some of the RBS surveys that were conducted in the month of May, they indicate that households expect the inflation to increase across all the major product groups in the next 3 months to up to 1 year of time. And even when it comes to the consumer confidence, it has also declined from the month of March, which is nearly 80% of the respondents expecting the prices to go up and accelerate over the next 1 year. So that's why we have seen that the RBI governor also has emphasized on the importance of maintaining a very strong focus on trying to anchoring the inflation expectations, which he has views that it is essential for sustained long-term growth of India. So that's why there are a lot of concerns that we see, that why exactly do we see that the repo rates haven't been changed by the Monetary Policy Committee, and there are especially the problems with regard to the food inflation, as well as the problems with regard to the oil prices and the metal sector. So these are the things that have led to all these kind of issues, and why the Monetary Policy Committee has taken these kind of steps. Now, coming to the next article, and this is on page number 9. In left-wing extremism affected seats and in Bihar, Nota still matters. Now, first and foremost, when it comes to the use of Nota, or that is none of the above option in the Lok Sabha elections, it is something that has been on a decline. Yet, what we see is that it remains significant in some of the certain constituencies. In 2014 and 2019 elections, Nota is something that saw very notable use in the areas that are affected by the left-wing extremism, and in very many constituencies in Bihar as well. And this trend is persistent into 2024 elections also. Now, in the 2024 Lok Sabha elections, there are certain seats where we saw that there were these kind of issues. So, for example, there are certain one-off cases, like for example in Indore, what happened in Indore. So in Indore, what we saw was that there was an unusual high Nota vote share of approximately 14%. 14% share of Nota votes in Indore. This spike is something that is attributed to the Congress, who had urged the voters to opt for Nota after their candidate, who was standing from there, he had withdrew his nomination and he had joined the BJP. Similarly, in the Andheri East Assembly by-polls that happened in Maharashtra back in November 2022, the Shiv Sena candidate had won after the BJP candidate had withdrawn from there. And there also what we saw was that Nota had received the second highest vote share of approximately 15%. So, despite the fact that we have seen that there has been an overall national decline of Nota, which has dropped below 1% for the first time in 2024, we see that there are certain constituencies specifically which continue to see very high Nota usage. And these specifically include the left-wing extremism affected areas, like you can say the areas of Bastar in Chhattisgarh, or Koraput and Nabarangpur in Odisha. Apart from that, Uruku in Andhra Pradesh also has seen trends similarly. So in all these cases, what we have seen is that there have been consistently high Nota shares. So for example, let's say when we take the specific case of Aruku, in Andhra Pradesh, here we saw that there have been significant use of Nota in 2019 and in 2024 elections. And in case of many of these areas, we have seen that there have been higher percentage of Nota vote shares. Now in 2019, if we go by data, in 2019, there were 11 seats which had more than 3% Nota vote shares, and in 2024 there were 4 seats that had followed these trends. Now in some of the areas where we have seen that, particularly in Bihar, we have seen that areas like Gopalganj had around 4% Nota share in 2024 and 5% in 2019, which also indicates a persistent preference to this kind of an option. So in summary, what we can say is that while overall Nota vote share has decreased, its strategic use in certain constituencies, particularly in response to specific political events or dissatisfaction with the candidates, is something that underscores the continued relevance of Nota. Now here one thing is specifically important to understand, that why do we see that in Naxal areas specifically the Nota vote shares are high, right? So there are several factors, and also let's try to understand these factors, because these are factors although not mentioned in the article, but we are going one step ahead and we need to try and understand why these kind of trends are being noted, what has been seen in the article. Now if we specifically talk about the areas which are Naxal affected areas, understand about them, why exactly do we see these kind of issues. First thing what we have seen is that there is some kind of disillusionment with the political candidates. Voters in these kind of areas, they very often feel that none of the candidates represent their interests or offer solutions to their problems. And that's why this is something that leads to a lack of trust and faith in the electoral process altogether. Alright, so in a manner you can say that there is some kind of lack of trust. Similarly, what we can also say is that many of these cases can also be, that's why, seen as a protest vote. You can in a manner say that these are protest votes, because casting a Nota vote is a form of protest against the existing political system and the candidates as well. And that's why it signals a kind of dissatisfaction and disapproval of the options which have been presented by the political parties. So that's why we see that we can count it as a protest vote. Similarly, many of these areas have seen some kind of alienation and neglect. Naxalism affected areas typically suffer from neglect and underdevelopment. The basic infrastructure, education, healthcare, employment opportunities, all these things are very often lacking in these areas, and that's why it causes kind of frustration among the population of these kind of areas. So that's why you can say that it is a kind of alienation and neglect. So lack of education, healthcare, infrastructure, all these things matter a lot, and that's why we see that even let's say lack of employment opportunities. So these kind of issues, they take a center seat, and that's why we see that this kind of neglect that we have seen over the years in these areas, that's why we see that this kind of problems happen, and that's why voters may use Nota to express their frustration and trying to draw attention to their neglected status. Then the influence of the Naxal movements also play a big role. Naxal movements very often, they promote the idea that the political system is flawed and corrupt. And this rhetoric is something that can influence the voters to reject all the candidates as a statement against the system itself. So that's why you can say that in a manner, the Naxal movements in these areas also play a big role. they, in a manner, they try to make statements against the system itself. So that also becomes one of the reasons why we have seen this. But apart from that, there are other concerns. There are concerns related to security. The frequent violence and insecurity in the Naxal affected regions, it is something that can also disrupt the political campaigns and reduce the voter engagement with the candidates. The voters might choose the Nota due to the lack of effective campaigning and lack of, you can say, interaction with the candidates also. So that's why, probably because of these security concerns, many of the times also we see that the interaction that should ideally happen, the kind of campaigning that we see in other areas, that kind of political campaigning doesn't really happen in many of these kind of areas. So that's why we see that security concerns also becomes a reason. Right? Security concerns also becomes a reason. And then after that, in a manner, sometimes there is also a lack of effective representation. Many voters in these kind of regions, they feel that the elected representatives, they do not effectively address their issues. And once, let's say, they are in the office, and repeated failures to improve the living conditions is something also that leads to a vote of no confidence through these relative representatives via the Nota system. So that's why we see that there are all these issues that we see, and especially that's why we see that although there has been a national decline in the number of Nota votes and the Nota share, but we still see that in the Naxal affected areas, these trends are not really changing a lot. So that's why just understand some of the perspectives related to this. Coming to our next article on page number 10, and this is it time for proportional representation? So let's try to understand what exactly are we saying. Right now, we know that the recent Lok Sabha election results had revealed that the ruling National Democratic Alliance, or NDA, secured a total of 293 seats, and their vote share has been 43.3%. The opposition bloc, the India Alliance as we call them, this is something they have a total of 234 seats, and they have a vote share of 41.6%. Alright, so you have 293 seats giving you 43.3% of the votes, and you have 234 seats giving you 41.6% of vote share. Other regional parties and independent candidates, they have garnered around 15% of the votes, and in total, so they have 15% of the votes, and they have a total of 16 seats. So this is what we have observed. Now let's try to understand what is the system that we use in India. The system that we use in India is called as the first past the post system. Alright, first past the post system. What exactly is it? This is a system that elects a candidate who receives the most number of votes in in any given constituencies. So for example, let's say if there are 2 lakh votes which have been cast. So out of those 2 lakh votes, suppose that there is one candidate who gets 1 lakh votes, and there is another candidate who gets 99,000 votes, and let's say there is a third candidate who gets 1,000 votes. So in this particular case, what happens is that this candidate who has won a total of 1 lakh votes, which has the candidate who has the highest number of votes, we see that they would be the one who would lead or who would win that particular constituency. So that's why candidate with the most votes in a constituency would win. This is the system that we are using in India. What are the advantages? First advantage we can say is simplicity. It is easy to understand and implement, especially in large countries like India. Secondly, it ensures stability. It ensures greater stability for the executive branches, as the ruling party or the coalition can secure a majority in the Lok Sabha or the Legislative Assembly without obtaining over 50% of the vote share across the constituencies. So that's why we see that there are these advantages that are often quoted when it comes to the first past the post system. Now when it comes to the criticism, we see that very often it can lead to over or under representation of the political parties relative to their vote share. There are historical examples here. So for example, Congress party, who had won 75% of the seats in the first couple of elections, in the first three elections after India's independence, they had between 45 to 47% of the vote share. So just imagine that they had 75% of the seats, which only came from 45 to 47% of the votes in the first three elections that happened after the independence. So this is the first system that we have, and that's why there is criticism that it can lead to disproportionate representation of the parties compared to their vote share. The second system is something which is that has been mentioned in the title of this article, and this is proportional representation. Now in proportional representation, it is something that ensures that parties gain seats in proportion to their vote share. Meaning that, again, if I take the same example, let's say if I have 1000, suppose that I have 100 votes in any given constituency, and there is one party that has won, let's say, 52% of the seats. There is the second party that has won 47% of the seats, 47 seats, and there is another party which has won just one seat. So then what we are saying here is that the parties will gain the seats in proportion to their vote share. They gain seats in proportion to their vote share. So one would have 52%, the other would have 47%, and the third one would have 1%. The most common method that is used here is called as party list system. Alright, there is this party list proportional representation. This is the most common method that is used here, where the voters choose the parties rather than choosing candidates. Alright, so the party is standing, BJP, Congress, Aam Aadmi Party is standing, but not a candidate for that constituency. What are the advantages here? First, it provides representation to all the parties according to their vote share. So for example, let's say when you take 2024 elections in states like Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, what we have seen is that in these kind of areas, the India Alliance would have secured 23 seats under the proportional representation system. Similarly, but they have 0 seats that they have achieved in these kind of areas. Similarly, the Biju Janata Dal in Odisha, they would have garnered a total of 9 seats instead of 0 seats that they have gotten there. So that's why we see that these kind of examples are quoted in when it comes to the proportional representation system, the advantages that we have. But when it comes to the criticisms, there are a lot of issues that we have here. For example, it can lead to a potential instability due to lack of clear majority. What we might see is that the PR systems can lead to fragmented legislatures with very large number of smaller parties, and this fragmentation is something that can make it very difficult for the to form stable governments, leading to frequent coalition governments, which may lead to unstable and maybe short-lived governments, right? So what may happen is that there are so many parties that are there now, and the party alignments can also change. There are a lot of alignment changes that we keep on seeing all the time. There have been so much of discussion that has also happened just after the elections also, that are there parties who are going to change their stance and are they going to jump the ship. So all these kind of discussions keep on happening with larger parties. Just imagine with the smaller parties, all these kind of things can even increase further. Similarly, what can also happen is that when it comes to the proportional representation system, it also encourages the formation of multiple political parties. And very often these kind of parties might be based on regional, caste, religious or linguistic lines. And this is something that can lead to fragmented political landscape, potentially also increasing the societal divisions. And it can also promote sectional interest over the national unity. So that's why this is something that can also become very dangerous, because regional parties, communal parties might increase in number, and it can lead to fragmentation in the political landscape. And that's why what may happen is that we might see that they start promoting sectional interests only, instead of looking at the national interest, which is very, very crucial for a country's development. Similarly, what we might also see is that when it comes to, let's say, this kind of a system which is called as the party list proportional representation, what may happen is that the voters, they cast their ballots for the parties rather than the individual candidates. And this is something that can also reduce the direct accountability of the representatives to their constituencies, as the voters have less influence over which individuals have been elected. And that's why what may happen here is that you can say that there will be a reduction in accountability. So this might lead to reduced accountability, right? Because you do not know who to ask. You have to ask a party instead of asking a candidate, correct? So that's why it becomes very difficult for accountability to be set to any particular representative. Similarly, there is a risk of rise of extremist parties, because especially those with low thresholds for representation can allow the extremist or the fringe parties to gain the seats in the legislature. And this can lead to inclusion of radical views in the legislative process as well, potentially also destabilizing the governance and the policy making of the country. And increased influence of the party leadership also is one factor to be looked upon. That when it comes to the party list PR system, it is something which can increase the power of the party leadership, as they control the placement of the candidates on the party list. And this is something that can reduce the independence of the individual legislatures and increase in the centralization within the political parties as well. So there are these kind of issues that we already talk about in case of certain parties, and this can increase further, where we see that there is one individual who's running the entire party, or there are a couple of individuals who are running the entire party, and the political representatives who are at a lower level, they have a very little say in the entire electoral process or entire process of working. So that's why there are these kind of issues that we very often see. So there is another system, and this is called as the mixed member proportional representation. This is something that combines both the FPTP and the PR systems. The candidates are elected through FPTP system from the territorial constituencies, and additional seats are allocated based on the party's vote percentage as well. So there are these kind of implementations that are very often also looked upon, that one candidate elected per constituency, and then additional seats which are based on the vote percentage. So we have seen that there are some of the international practices here. So for example, when it comes to the proportional representation system, we have seen that there are countries like Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, Netherlands. In all these cases, we have seen that they actually have the PR based system. And then there are other countries like Germany and in New Zealand, we see that they use the mixed system. In Germany, for example, half of the seats are filled via the FPTP system, and the rest are allocated based on the vote share for the parties that secure at least 5% of the votes. And similarly, we see that in New Zealand also a similar model is followed. So that's why we see that all these systems are also being followed. So that's why maybe there are chances that we can look upon these systems. So that's why the Law Commission's report, the 170th report that had come back in 1999, it had recommended that experimentation can be done with the mixed system, where it had suggested that 25% of the seats could be filled through the proportional representation system. So that's why we have seen, we have to see how exactly the things go, because the upcoming delimitation, which is based on the first census which has happened post 2026, it is something that could be an opportunity to implement the mixed representation system, and it might address concerns of some of the smaller states and maintaining the federal balance altogether in the country. So we have to see, and we have to actually weigh out both the sides of the situation so that we can take a proper decision. Coming to the next article on page number 15, this is migrants left stranded as Tunisia tries to keep them from reaching Europe. So what we basically have seen is that many of the migrants in North Africa, specifically in Tunisia, they find themselves trapped in a very dire condition as they attempt to reach the Europe. Tunisia's Mediterranean coastline, which is near the Italian island, as you can see here on this map, that this is where you have Tunisia and it is very near the Italian islands. Now, so it is something that serves as the last stop for all these migrants, right? So for the migrants who are coming from, let's say, the North Africa and the West Asia side, for them Tunisia is, you can say, the last stop before they can jump to the Europe. However, this journey is very often turned into a nightmare for them as they wait in the makeshift shelters under very harsh conditions as they wait for an opportunity to cross to Italy. And many have fled from war, from poverty, from climate change, from persecution, but they lack the funds to return to their homes if their plans fail. Now, in this particular scenario, we need to understand this situation, because so we know that in many of the cases, we know that they are coming from a situation where they are torn apart by war or by poverty, or you can say political instability. Even the cases of climate change related migration is now being observed. So overall, persecution, political instability. So there are all these issues that they are facing. Now, when it comes to the UN's International Organization for Migration, it has estimated that there are 15,000 to 20,000 migrants that are stuck in the rural areas of near central Tunisian coastline. Now, this situation is a consequence of very strict anti-migration policies that we have seen in Tunisia and also in Europe, especially coming from the European right wing. And that's why we have seen that there are all these kind of issues that they are facing. Despite the Euro-funded Coast Guard's efforts, which has very significantly reduced the number of migrants successfully crossing to Italy, the stranded migrants in Tunisia, they face severe hardships. In 2023, for example, Europe and Tunisia, they agreed on a €1 billion deal to try and manage the migration. But this is something that has led to a bottleneck on the Tunisian coast. And it is something also which has caused a lot of frustration among both the migrants and also the people of Tunisia. The civil society groups, they are demanding that there should be an expulsion of all the migrants. And the UN has actually raised concerns about the increased racist rhetoric and the kind of targeting, especially of the black migrants that have been observed in these areas. Tunisia's government has also been accused of deporting the migrants to the remote border areas with the Libya and Algeria, which are the neighboring borders of Tunisia. And very often this has led to a lot of deaths of migrants as well. The president also has anti-migrant rhetoric, and that's a rhetoric, and that's why we have seen that it has also it has also increased the kind of severity of the situation. Very often we have seen that the president has positioned himself as the defender of the Tunisian identity, while also securing more, you can say, European assistance at the same time. So despite recognizing Tunisia's democratic decline, what we have seen is that European leaders, including the Italian premier, they have also praised the migration agreement. And this partnership is something that is seen as very crucial for Tunisia's stability, but there are critics who have argued that it endangers the democracy and it also exploits the migrants for political gains. The migrants are very likely to continue passing through Tunisia, and at this point of time, that's why we see that these migrants are being used, or their plights are being used to bolster the populist stance that has been also taken by the political parties, and especially, let's say, the president of Tunisia, to secure more European support also. So that's why we see that there are all these problems, that although there have been the deal, and there are concerns that have been raised by the UN and the NGOs, but yet we see that there are no significant improvements in the plight of the migrants who are stranded in these kind of areas. So that's why we see that there are all these issues. Now lastly, coming to the prelims article for the day, and this is about hydrogen line. Now let's try to understand what do we mean by hydrogen line. Now hydrogen line is something which is very significant in the modern astronomy, and it is something that is instrumental in studying the distant stars and in searching for extraterrestrial intelligence as well. Now when it comes to hydrogen atom, a hydrogen atom which has one proton and one electron has a property which is called as its spin. Now this spin can either be pointed upwards or downwards. Alright, there can be an upstream upspin, or there can be a downspin. Alright, so just see this as a property that electrons and protons have. Alright, so electrons and protons, they have this property called as spin. I'll not go into the detail of it, it's too scientific to be asked, but just know that okay, there is this property called as spin. So this spin is either up or down. Now when the spin of both these particles, that is the proton and an electron, so if the spin of both these particles, they align, then in that case we say that the atom is in a lower energy state. So meaning that if, let's say, both are up or if both are down, that would mean that there is a lower energy state. Alright, this would mean that there is a lower energy state in the atom. And that's why conversely, when the spins are anti-aligned, alright, when the spins are anti-aligned, either like this or like this. So if the spins are anti-aligned, then in that case the atom has a higher energy level. Alright, so that would mean that the atom has higher energy. Alright, has a higher energy. Now when the electron flips its spin to align with the proton, it releases energy as electromagnetic radiation, which has a wavelength of 21 centimeter. Now this wavelength, so just understand this, I'm just repeating this again, that when the electron, alright, when the electron flips its spin to align with the proton, alright, so when in this kind of a situation, suppose that this is of the proton and this is the spin of the electron. So what happens is that when this spin changes, so when this spin changes like this, so that it is aligning with the proton's spin. So when it changes or flips its spin to align with the proton, it releases energy as electromagnetic radiation, which has a wavelength of 21 centimeter. This exactly is known as hydrogen line. Alright, this, so when the spins flip from anti-aligned to aligned, the energy is released as 21 centimeter electromagnetic radiation, and this is something which is called as the hydrogen line. Alright, this is called as hydrogen line. So electron is flipping its spin to align with the spin of proton, releasing electromagnetic radiation of 21 centimeter wavelength, and this is called as hydrogen line. Now this is something that was discovered back in 1951. This emission, it is something that revolutionized the radio astronomy by enabling the detection of very cold neutral hydrogen clouds in the interstellar space. And this discovery also allowed the scientists to map the Milky Way galaxy and also to uncover the spiral arms of the Milky Way. So if you have seen the photographs of Milky Way, you'll see that there is a center that the Milky Way has, and then there are arms which come out of this Milky Way galaxy, right? You might have seen something like this. So that's why this is something that was discovered as a understanding of hydrogen line. So today what we see is that the astronomers, they use the 21 centimeter hydrogen line to probe the early universe's the first light that came from the early universe and the kind of emissions that happened back then. And that's why they proposed that it should be used for understanding the interstellar communication as well. So potentially it might be detectable by the alien civilizations. So that's why when it comes to the applications, it can help in detecting, it has helped us in detecting the cold and neutral hydrogen in the interstellar space. It has helped us in mapping the Milky Way and discovering the spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy. Then also it has helped us in probing the early universe light emissions, and then lastly it can lead to potential communication methods for extraterrestrial or alien civilization detection. So this is how we finally might be able to get a communication line established with Jadoo, and finally we might see whatever these movies have told us or have shown us probably can become a reality. Alright, coming to the mains questions for the day, there are these two questions. The first question is, discuss the advantages and disadvantages of the first past the post electoral system. Evaluate the potential benefits and challenges of adopting a mixed member proportional representation system in India. So we discussed the fact that we have the FPTP system that we use in India right now, but there have been some recommendation by the Law Commission in the past as well that we should also try the mixed member proportional representation system. So we discussed all those points. You have to mention those points here. Second question, discuss the factors contributing to persistent food price inflation in India and analyze the challenges faced by the MPC in achieving its inflation targets. Alright, so we discussed that there are certain factors because of which the prices or the food prices especially have been on a high, and similarly the challenges, why exactly are we not able to achieve the inflation targets. Similarly, the second part of the question is also examine the implications of the climate events and global commodity price fluctuations on India's inflation trajectory. So these two we know that, and there have been many instances where we have discussed that how climate change or climate events can have a negative impact on economy, on world economy as well as on Indian economy. So you have to mention those points. And then lastly about the commodity price, that is fuel prices, oil prices, metal prices, all these things. So these are the things that you have to mention in this particular answer, right? So with this we come to the end of today's session. I hope that this session was helpful for you. Do subscribe to our channel and please like the videos, and we'll keep bringing more videos for you. Thank you very much for being here.